A few days ago, I was talking shop with some friends who are also in the creative space. During our discussion, we touched upon the difficulties they were having with managing files and collaborating with their colleagues. The team relies on multiple external hard drives and usually shares files through chat and emails. It's definitely a workflow I would not recommend. But this whole discussion got me thinking, why not dedicate a video about proper workflows, like how to manage your data in an efficient way, how to back things up, the hardware and software needed for all that, and finally best practices when collaborating with others. The topic is way too big to cover in one video, so my plan is to split things up into multiple videos. This first one is going to be about managing data, using a NAS, what to avoid when setting up network storage, and how to ensure uninterrupted operation. In the next videos, we will dive deeper into asset management, which is another huge topic. But for now, let's start with the simpler stuff. Some things discussed in the video you might already know, so if you want to skip around to another part of the video, feel free to do so. I'll have chapter markers in the description below. You'll also find all of my hardware and software recommendations there too. You can use them as a point of reference for the type of gear you need, or you can just straight up copy and paste them to your card. Your choice. So, let's start with the basics. What are the benefits of owning a NAS? What kind of issues does it solve? The first and most important benefit that comes to mind is the fact that we have a centralized location for all data. Our files are no longer scattered around several external hard drives. There's one place where everything lives. Project files, photos, documents, it's all there. And because it's a network drive, it's available on all of our devices: desktop, laptop, phone, and tablet. Let's say, for example, that I'm tired of sitting on my desk all day and I want to continue my work on the iPad while relaxing on the couch. I don't have to use weird solutions like emailing files to myself. The files I worked on the computer are saved on the NAS, so I can just access them from my iPad without much hassle. If you're working with a team, the benefits of centralized storage increase exponentially. If a teammate is looking for a specific file, you don't have to use USB sticks or sending them files through the network. You just point them to the correct folder in the NAS and you're good to go. This makes project collaboration much easier overall. But just because multiple people are accessing the same drive, it doesn't mean that security goes out the window. Users can be assigned different levels of access, so only the people you want will be able to access certain files. Setting up permissions is a simple process, and it can be done easily through the NAS's web interface. A NAS can also be accessed outside the office, which is perfect if we have team members that work remotely or if we just want to share files with a client. Let's take as an example the client scenario. Instead of creating Dropbox folders and WeTransfer links, we can create distributable links right from our NAS. And we can also set an expiration date just like Dropbox, but without the extra costs. Remote access is also useful for you as an individual. Let's say you're on a trip and you just realize that you're missing a couple of important documents. You can log into the NAS and grab whatever you need in a matter of seconds. Of course, before exposing your data to the internet, you need to take some safety precautions, but once everything's set up, you don't have to worry about anything. Another thing worth noting is that a NAS is basically a computer with a lot of hard drive bays. It might be a slow computer compared to your workstation, but it's still a computer, so we can do a whole lot more than just storing files. For example, a network drive can be an amazing entertainment hub. You can create your own personal Netflix just by installing Plex or the company's default applications. I'm using Synology's DS Video and it works wonderfully. I can browse my movie and TV show collection with ease and with a beautiful interface that displays all necessary information. Cover artwork, plot description, ratings, it's all there. And most importantly, all that is done automatically by the application. We don't have to do anything ourselves. We just have to make sure that our video files are in a specific folder. The system will take care of the rest. It will go on the internet and find all the correct info for movies and TV shows. And as we've discussed before, since it's a network drive, it's available everywhere. So we can stream content to the living room TV, we can watch it on the iPad, all scenarios are possible. This is something I do quite often. I will start watching a show on the Apple TV, but then I'll switch to the iPad. The application is smart enough to ask me if I want to resume from that point. It's a really amazing, seamless experience. But that's not all. We can run a ton of other applications, like a photo app to store and share photos with family and friends. We can also run more complex things like virtual machines, allowing us to use multiple operating systems and applications. If you want to, you can basically run a whole suite of programs that replace commonly used applications like Microsoft Office, etc. It's a computer that runs 24/7, so you can even host your own website if you wanted to. I wouldn't recommend that because you need to know what you're doing, but the ability is definitely there. Now that we've covered the benefits of owning a NAS, what kind of hardware should we aim for? Should we go with pre-built, expensive solutions, or build our own cheap solution from spare PC parts? As enticing as the latter part might sound, I would discourage you to do so. When you're buying the pre-built systems from Synology or QNAP, you're basically paying for convenience. Someone else has already built a working system that you can use right out of the box. They've spent the time to create workflows and software that works without you having to tinker for hours. Building your own NAS will probably be cheaper than any pre-built option, but you have to maintain pretty much every aspect of it, software and hardware. It's doable, but personally it's not how I want to spend my time. The other side effect of building your own system is the fact that it's easy to go overboard, adding powerful processors, lots of memory, and going nuts in general with all the specs, which will show up later on in your electricity bill. The NAS I'm using runs 24/7, it's great for my purposes, and my electricity bill is not really affected by it. So I would say just stick to Synology or QNAP. I personally use Synology and I would easily recommend them, but both companies have pros and cons. For me, Synology just ticks a lot more boxes. So let's say that you've made your decision and you're gonna go for either one of them, Synology or QNAP. How do you choose the best setup for your needs? Both companies have a ton of different products, and if you visit their websites, it's easy to get overwhelmed. But in reality, it's super simple. It basically boils down to two things. You need a NAS that can support fast transfer speeds and an adequate number of drive bays. Try to aim for 10 gigabit per second connections. Anything lower than that, and it's going to be a chore to transfer huge files around. So avoid solutions with 2.5 gigabit per second connections. These days, file sizes can be really big, so 2.5 gigabits is too slow. For an individual or for a small creative team, I would recommend Synology's 1821 Plus. It strikes a good balance between good performance, noise levels, and drive bays. Speaking of which, let's talk about drive bays. I know you probably think that 2 drives is more than enough, but think of a NAS as a device that will grow with your needs. So even if you won't be able to use all that space now, you probably will in the near future. The more you rely on the device and the more use cases you discover, your data needs will grow too. So at a minimum, I would suggest 4 drive bays, and even better, an 8-bay NAS, hence my 1821 Plus suggestion. I'm using its predecessor, the 1819 Plus. I know what you're thinking, I won't even need 4 drives, let alone 8, but hear me out. First off, you don't have to populate all bays at once. I currently use 5 slots, and I'm planning to add another drive in the next couple of weeks. With 8 bays, you can easily add more space when it's needed. The moment you're running low on space, you just pop in another drive and you're good to go. And don't forget, having 4 or 8 drives doesn't mean that you have 4 or 8 drives worth of usable space. Part of that space is reserved for data parity. So if for some reason a drive fails, no data will be lost. The system will be able to restore everything from all the bits and pieces that are duplicated on the other drives. Depending on the parity, RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, one or more drives worth of space will be reserved to duplicate data. So even if 2 drives crash at the same time, we'll still be fine. Without feature parity, if any drive would go out, all of our data will be lost. So knowing all that, let's examine the viability of the most popular buying option, the 2-bay NAS. In my opinion, a NAS with 2 bays is a complete waste of money. For starters, the hardware is usually extremely underpowered, so forget about extra functionalities like running a separate OS, video decoding, expansion ports, or fast Ethernet ports. But even if those things wouldn't be an issue for you, there's still the issue of drive space. If we use data parity, which I highly recommend, it means that we just have 1 drive's worth of space, which is as good as just buying a single drive and calling it done. That's why I recommend going for 4 drive bays or more. Every company has helpful calculators on their website that will let you know how much usable space is left depending on your RAID setup of choice. Definitely experiment with them and find the solution that best fits your needs. What you need to know is that RAID 6 or SHR2 can handle 2 drives failing at the same time, and RAID 1 or SHR is enough for a single disk failure. I'm using SHR2, which is Synology's RAID 6 setup. It allows for some extra features like data snapshots, but let's leave that for some other time. If you're planning to get an 8-bay system and use only 4 drives, I would still suggest going for 2 drive redundancy. Yeah, 2 drive redundancy for 4 drives is an overkill, but in this case we're not doing it for safety concerns. We just want to save time in the future. Once you start adding more drives into the array, you will want to switch to 2 drive redundancy. And doing that later on is going to take a really long time. I'm talking multiple days to weeks, depending on the amount of data on the drives and how much resources you devote to the task. So better take the hit at the beginning when there's not any data on the drives, rather than having to deal with long conversion times in the future. Backups should play an important part in your day-to-day workflow. Just having them on the NAS is not enough. You need to make sure that your data also lives somewhere else. So if something goes wrong, nothing's lost. I personally use 2 options: backups on external hard drives and backups on the cloud. Both are very easy to set up. In Synology's case, both options are handled through an application called Hyper Backup. The app is very flexible and it even allows for fancier things like backing up on another NAS. I have an external case permanently connected to the Synology, which allows me to switch between different hard drives. Once I put the drive on the external case, I can start the backup process. And when that's done, the drive will be ejected automatically, so I can switch to another one and continue with the rest of the files. I cannot fit everything into one drive, and that's why I'm using multiple disks. The process for backing up to the cloud is relatively similar. We create a task for it, choose the files we want backed up, and that's about it. The NAS will initiate the process based on the schedule we've already defined. I would suggest being a little bit more selective with your data in this scenario. Uploading 40 terabytes of data can be time consuming and expensive. So for cloud backups, pick only the absolutely most essential data. But cost is not as crazy as you might imagine. I'm using Backblaze's B2 storage and it's very affordable. For example, storing 3 terabytes of data sets you back approximately 168 euros per year, which is very competitive. A 3 terabyte Dropbox plan, for example, costs 198 euros. Dropbox in this case is not only more expensive, but it's also less flexible. With Backblaze's B2 plan, we can do a whole lot more, like create collaborative spaces for us and our teammates, so we can all work remotely and share this one big space on the cloud. The closest plan Dropbox has for this type of scenario is the 3 team member professional plan, which is quite a bit more expensive than Backblaze. 535 euros for Dropbox compared to 279 euros for Backblaze. And the more people we add on the Dropbox plan, the more expensive it gets. This is not the case for Backblaze. The price remains at 279 euros. Of course, setting up Backblaze is more involved than Dropbox, but the process is not as scary as you might think. I plan to do a separate tutorial about that, so make sure to check back in a couple of weeks. Okay, so we've covered pretty much the most important bits of file management. The last piece of the puzzle has to do with making sure that our NAS will work uninterrupted. A NAS is a device that should stay on 24/7, but there's a lot of things that can happen during the day. Electricity surges, power failures, and so on and so forth. So we need to make sure that none of that will affect our network storage. And for that, we'll need a UPS. Since the NAS is relatively power efficient, even a small UPS can work. I use a relatively basic model from APC. Build-wise, it's quite cheap, but it does the job. I have the router, network switch, phone, a light, and the NAS all hooked up to it. In case of a power failure, this tiny little UPS can power all these components for around 40 minutes straight. And the best part is that the UPS can talk directly to the NAS. So once a power failure is detected, our device can power down safely. We can set up how long it will take before the NAS will shut down in the preferences. That way, the drive and the data on them will be protected. There are UPSs that don't have this direct talk to the NAS, so make sure that the UPS you're planning to buy has that included. I know that all these things might be overwhelming, but hopefully now that you have a better idea of where to look and what to search for, the process is going to be a little bit less intimidating. My hardware and software setup is in the description below, so have a look at it and get an idea of the kind of setup you want to build. And I think that's about it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and if your question is too complicated to answer in text, I might do a whole other video about it. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.